They thought they could bully a black woman in her own yard, but what they didn't know, her husband was a retired military general, and when they laid hands on her, he showed them a kind of discipline no bully could ever withstand. This isn't just a fight with the HOA, this is a war they'll never forget. It was a bright Saturday morning in the suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek. Jasmine Carter, a graceful woman in her early 40s, stepped out of her modest but well-kept home. She had a warm smile and a calm energy, carrying a basket of fresh flowers she had picked from her small garden. Life had finally begun to feel peaceful for Jasmine, who had spent years moving from base to base as the devoted wife of a military man. Her husband, General Marcus Carter, had retired just 2 years earlier after decades of service to the nation. Marcus was away that morning, running errands in town. Jasmine took the chance to trim her roses, humming softly as the sun poured golden light across the yard. The couple's home wasn't the largest in the neighborhood, but it carried dignity. Marcus had insisted on buying it with his hard-earned pension, refusing to take out unnecessary loans. Yet, despite their peaceful intentions, Jasmine and Marcus were not fully accepted by the neighborhood's homeowners association, HOA. The group had a notorious reputation for targeting families they felt didn't fit in. And for Jasmine and Marcus, being one of the few black families in Willow Creek, the hostility often lingered just beneath the surface. That morning, 2 HOA enforcers, Brad and Connor, walked down the street. Both were loud, arrogant, and carried themselves like bullies who thrived on power. They spotted Jasmine trimming her bushes and exchanged smirks. Brad muttered, "Here we go again. Time to remind her who runs this place." Jasmine looked up politely as they approached, but their faces held no friendliness. Connor pointed at her basket of flowers and sneered, "Those aren't HOA-approved plants. We've told you before." Jasmine kept her composure. "These are roses from my own yard. There's nothing against them in the guidelines." Brad stepped closer, his voice turning harsh. "Lady, don't get smart. Around here, we make the rules." Jasmine's heart pounded, sensing trouble brewing, trouble her husband wasn't here to stop. Jasmine stood her ground, clutching the basket of roses a little tighter. She had dealt with Brad and Connor before, but never this close, never with this level of aggression. Normally, they spat their warnings from a distance and left. But today, something about their stance made her uneasy. Brad leaned in, his voice dripping with intimidation. "You think because your husband's some big-shot ex-soldier you can do whatever you want here?" His eyes narrowed. "This neighborhood isn't yours. People like you never last long in Willow Creek." Jasmine's breath caught at his words. It wasn't about flowers, and she knew it. Their prejudice had always lingered in whispers, but now it stood in front of her, bare and unmasked. Connor circled her slowly, his tone mocking. "We've had complaints. Too many. About your so-called decorations. Your car parked a little crooked last week, and even the way your lawn looks. You think rules don't apply?" She raised her chin, refusing to bow. "My husband and I follow every rule. You're making things up." That flicker of dignity in her voice enraged Brad. He shoved the basket out of her hands, roses scattering across the driveway like torn pride. Jasmine gasped, stepping back in shock. "Don't talk back," Brad barked. "We told you once, we'll tell you again. Either you do what we say, or we'll make life impossible for you." Connor laughed cruelly, adding, "And don't think Marcus can protect you. He's not the general here. We are." Jasmine's heart raced, her hands trembling. She wanted to call Marcus, but her phone was inside the house. She took a step toward her door, but Brad blocked her path, his eyes full of menace. What they didn't know was that Jasmine's quiet strength came from years of standing beside a man forged in battle, a man who was already on his way home. The sound of tires crunching gravel broke the tense silence. A black SUV pulled into the driveway, and Jasmine's heart leapt with relief. General Marcus Carter stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even in casual clothes. His salt-and-pepper hair and sharp gaze carried the weight of decades in service. Marcus immediately noticed the scattered roses, his wife's shaken posture, and the 2 men looming too close. His jaw tightened. Though retired, the instinct of a soldier never left him. He closed the car door slowly, every movement deliberate, calculated. "Jasmine," he said firmly but gently, "what's going on here?" Before she could answer, Brad sneered. "So this is the big general? Thought you'd look tougher. This is our neighborhood now, old man. You don't get to boss anyone around here." Marcus's eyes darkened, but he stayed calm. "Step away from my wife," Connor chuckled mockingly. "Or what? You'll write us up? Sorry, General, but your uniform doesn't mean anything here." Jasmine reached for Marcus's arm, whispering, "They pushed me, Marcus. They knocked my flowers down." Marcus took a slow breath, keeping his composure. "You put your hands on my wife?" His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that made men twice their size hesitate. Brad puffed out his chest, masking his nerves with arrogance. "We enforce the rules. If she doesn't listen, she gets handled. That's how it works." Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You may enforce petty neighborhood rules, but let me make this clear. No one, and I mean no one, touches my wife." For the first time, Brad and Connor faltered. There was something in Marcus's eyes, an authority deeper than any neighborhood rulebook. Brad forced a laugh, trying to shake off the weight of Marcus's words. "What are you going to do, old man? This isn't the battlefield. You don't scare us." But Connor wasn't so bold. He shifted uneasily, sensing the danger behind Marcus's calmness. There was no yelling, no wild gestures, just a controlled intensity that spoke louder than threats. Jasmine had seen it before, during the years Marcus led soldiers into combat. That same unshakable aura now filled their driveway. Marcus folded his arms across his chest, his voice deep and steady. "Let me explain something. I've commanded thousands of men. I've stood in war zones where cowards like you wouldn't last 5 minutes. And I've protected this country so people like my wife could live in peace. You crossed a line today." Brad sneered, but his voice cracked slightly. "Don't lecture us. Around here we set the rules." Marcus stepped closer, eye level with Brad. "No, you abuse them. You think this HOA is a license to bully and intimidate families who don't look like you. But I don't tolerate bullies, ever." Jasmine finally found her voice, standing beside Marcus. "All I wanted was to pick flowers from my garden. That's all." Her words, trembling yet dignified, made Connor avert his gaze. Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Pick up those flowers you knocked down." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Brad's pride screamed at him to refuse, but something in Marcus's stance made his hand twitch. Connor nudged him, whispering nervously, "Brad, maybe we should just go." But Marcus wasn't finished. "This is your first and last warning. If either of you come near my wife again, you won't just be dealing with me, you'll be dealing with the law." The message was clear. Marcus Carter was not a man to test. Brad's face turned red, his pride stung by Marcus's commanding presence. The idea of being ordered around, especially in front of a woman, set his ego ablaze. He shoved his hands into his pockets and spat on the ground near Jasmine's roses. "You think you scare me because you were some big shot, General? This isn't the army, old man. This is real life, and in this neighborhood we're the authority." Marcus didn't flinch. His gaze stayed locked, calm and steady. "Authority without respect is nothing but tyranny. You've mistaken your position for power." Connor tugged Brad's arm, whispering urgently, "Let's just leave, man." He's not bluffing. But Brad refused. Instead, he stepped forward, jabbing his finger toward Jasmine. "She's the problem. Always acting like she's better than the rest of us. If she won't follow the rules, we'll make her—" That was the breaking point. Marcus's body stiffened, his soldier's instinct taking over. He moved with precision, gently but firmly placing himself between Brad and Jasmine. His voice dropped to a chilling calm. "Touch her, and you'll regret it." Brad laughed harshly, but his bravado was wearing thin. "What are you going to do, huh? Hit me? Then we'll sue you, get you kicked out of this neighborhood." Jasmine's voice trembled, but she stood tall beside Marcus. "We've done nothing wrong. You're the ones crossing boundaries." Connor's nerves finally broke. He glanced at Brad, then at Marcus, then muttered, "We should go before this gets out of hand." But Brad wasn't ready to back down. His pride was too fragile, his anger too blind. He shoved Marcus's shoulder with a quick, reckless push. The moment his hand touched the retired general, the atmosphere shifted entirely. Marcus's eyes hardened, calm was gone. The soldier within him was fully awake. The shove wasn't hard, but it was enough to ignite the fire Marcus Carter had kept buried since retirement. The years of discipline, training, and battlefield experience rushed back in a heartbeat. Jasmine gasped, clutching Marcus's arm. "Marcus, please, don't—" But Marcus remained composed, not lashing out recklessly like Brad expected. Instead, he straightened his posture, his presence towering over the two men. His voice cut through the air like steel. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Brad tried to laugh it off, though his voice trembled. What are you going to do, old man? You don't have your soldiers here to back you up. Marcus took one step forward, forcing Brad to step back without realizing it. His movements were precise, deliberate, like a predator circling prey. Connor's face paled. He had seen enough to know Marcus wasn't bluffing. You think violence makes you strong? Marcus said, his voice low but thunderous. I've stood in deserts where real men bled to protect freedom. I've seen courage in the eyes of soldiers half your age with twice your integrity. And then I see you, two cowards hiding behind HOA rules. Connor swallowed hard, mumbling, Brad, let's just walk away. But Brad, blinded by rage, swung his fist clumsily toward Marcus. In one swift motion, Marcus sidestepped, grabbed Brad's wrist, and twisted it behind his back. Brad let out a yelp of pain, dropping to one knee on the driveway. Connor froze, stunned at how effortlessly it happened. Marcus leaned down close to Brad's ear. I don't fight for sport, and I don't fight to humiliate, but if you ever lay a hand on my wife again, I'll make sure the law knows exactly who you are. Jasmine stood still, heart pounding, watching her husband transform from calm protector to unshakable warrior in seconds. Brad groaned on one knee, his wrist pinned firmly in Marcus's grip. The sound of the scuffle had drawn attention. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some even stepped onto porches to watch. Phones came out quickly, recording every second. Jasmine's face burned with both fear and pride. She whispered urgently, Marcus, everyone's watching. Marcus kept his hold steady, his voice calm but commanding. Good. Let them see the truth. Connor shifted nervously, glancing around at the growing audience. Brad, enough. You're making a fool of yourself. But Brad, his pride shredded, spat back, Shut up. I'm not letting this guy win. He struggled wildly, but Marcus didn't flinch. With a controlled motion, Marcus released him, letting Brad stumble forward onto the pavement. The crowd gasped as Brad scrambled to his feet, red-faced and furious. You're finished, Brad shouted, pointing at Marcus. We'll have you thrown out of this neighborhood. We'll ruin you. Marcus squared his shoulders, his gaze sweeping across the watching neighbors. No, what you just saw was me defending my wife, and I will do it again if I have to. This isn't about HOA rules, it's about harassment. It's about two men abusing their positions. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered uneasily. Jasmine finally stepped forward, her voice strong despite the tremor. All I did was pick flowers. That's what started this. Ask yourselves, does that deserve threats and violence? Connor's face sagged, shame creeping in. He muttered, We didn't mean... But Brad cut him off with a roar, Don't apologize. Marcus's eyes locked onto Brad. You've already crossed the line. Now it's time for accountability. For the first time, Brad seemed unsure. The tide of opinion in the neighborhood was shifting, and he could feel it slipping away from him. The tense standoff was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps. A sharp voice called out, What in the world is going on here? It was Linda Hayes, the HOA president, a woman in her 50s known for her strictness and iron grip over neighborhood affairs. She marched down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, her expression caught between outrage and confusion as she saw Brad's disheveled state and Marcus's towering stance. Brad immediately seized the chance. Linda, finally, this man assaulted me. He attacked us for enforcing the rules. Linda's eyes narrowed. Is this true? She demanded, glaring at Marcus. Before Marcus could answer, Jasmine stepped forward, her voice ringing with quiet strength. No, Linda. They came to our house. They knocked my flowers to the ground, shoved me, and then one of them laid hands on my husband. He defended himself, nothing more. A ripple went through the watching crowd. Several neighbors nodded, voices rising in agreement. That's right. We saw it. They've been harassing the Carters for months. Linda blinked, taken aback by the collective pushback. She had expected the Carters to stand alone, but clearly, the neighborhood had seen more than Brad and Connor realized. Connor shuffled his feet, mumbling, She's telling the truth, Linda. Brad went too far. Brad spun on him, furious. Shut up, Connor. Marcus finally spoke, his tone steady but commanding. Mrs. Hayes, I respect rules when they're applied fairly, but your enforcers abused their authority. They disrespected my wife in her own yard, and I won't allow it to happen again. Linda hesitated. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not so publicly. The cameras recording every second made her even more cautious. The balance of power had shifted, and now the HOA itself stood on trial before the neighborhood. The crowd pressed closer, neighbors whispering while phones stayed raised, capturing every detail. Linda Hayes, usually untouchable in her authority, felt the pressure of dozens of eyes. For once, she couldn't sweep an incident under the rug. Brad, still fuming, jabbed his finger toward Marcus. "You're not welcome here. People like you always stir up trouble. Linda, you need to evict them now before this neighborhood goes downhill." Gasps erupted. Several neighbors muttered in disgust at his words. Jasmine's chest tightened, but Marcus placed a steady hand on her shoulder, silently reminding her to stand tall. Linda's face hardened. "Brad, watch your words." But Marcus wasn't going to let it slide. His voice carried, deep and steady, meant for everyone to hear. "People like me?" He took a step forward, his presence filling the space. "I've spent my life protecting this country. I've led men into battle so you could sleep safely at night. I've buried soldiers who gave everything for people they'd never meet. And you dare stand here in front of my wife and neighbors and say I don't belong?" The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by a few murmurs of "he's right" from the crowd. Connor lowered his head, shame etched across his face. "Linda, it's true." Brad started it. He shoved Mrs. Carter. General Carter didn't attack us, he defended her. Brad whipped around, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "You coward!" Linda inhaled sharply, realizing the truth was undeniable. Too many witnesses, too many recordings, too much evidence. If she sided with Brad, the HOA would face backlash it couldn't contain. Marcus straightened, his voice calm but firm. "We're not leaving, Mrs. Hayes. My wife and I have earned our peace, and if anyone thinks they can intimidate us out of it, they're gravely mistaken." For the first time, Brad looked small, stripped of his false authority, exposed before everyone. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of cicadas in the trees. Neighbors leaned in, their phones recording, their faces tense with anticipation. Jasmine clutched Marcus's arm, proud but anxious. This confrontation was far from over. Brad, still desperate to save face, sparked, "He's just pretending. Retired general, my foot, probably washed out years ago. He's nothing but a fraud." That was it. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a leather case, opening it to reveal his military ID and a silver medal, tarnished but gleaming under the sun. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This is who I am," Marcus said, his voice steady. "General Marcus Carter, U.S. Army, retired, 35 years of service, 2 tours overseas, commendations for valor. And the only reason you're free to strut around this neighborhood with your petty authority is because of men and women like me." Jasmine's eyes welled with tears, pride swelling in her chest. The neighbors murmured louder, admiration replacing doubt. One man in the back whispered, "I read about him years ago. He's a decorated war hero." Linda's face flushed, realizing Brad had picked a fight with the last man anyone should challenge. She straightened her clipboard awkwardly, trying to regain control. "General Carter, I had no idea." Marcus's gaze sharpened. "That's the problem. You never cared to know. You let bullies enforce rules without oversight. And now my wife was assaulted in broad daylight because of it." Brad stammered, his arrogance crumbling. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," Marcus cut in, his voice like thunder, "and you'll answer for it." The crowd erupted, some clapping, others shouting in agreement. For once, the neighborhood stood united, and Marcus Carter was at its center, not as a victim but as a leader once again. The murmurs grew into a wave of voices. Neighbors who had long kept silent about Brad and Connor's bullying finally spoke up. "They fined me for leaving a holiday wreath too long," one woman shouted. "They threatened my kids over playing basketball in the driveway," another added. "They've been harassing everyone for years." Linda Hayes's face paled as the truth spilled out. The authority she had always wielded with impunity was unraveling before her eyes. Marcus raised his hand, his calm presence immediately quieting the crowd. "Enough. This isn't about petty fines or rules. This is about abuse of power. And it ends today." Jasmine's voice trembled but carried strength. "No family should live in fear in their own home. That's not community. That's oppression." The neighbors nodded, their eyes shifting toward Linda, silently demanding action. She swallowed hard, then turned sharply toward Brad and Connor. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from any HOA enforcement duties. An investigation will follow, and if these accusations hold, which it seems they do, you're finished." Brad's jaw dropped. "You can't do this." Connor sighed, shoulders slumping. "She can. And frankly, you deserve it, Brad." The crowd broke into applause, some clapping, others cheering. For the first time, Jasmine felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Marcus stepped closer to Brad, his voice low but resolute. "You tried to break us. Instead, you showed this community who you really are. Now you'll answer for it." Brad's eyes darted nervously around, but there was no support left. The neighborhood had turned its back on him. Jasmine slipped her hand into Marcus's, her voice soft. "You've always protected me, but today you reminded them all who you are." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, his eyes still fixed on Brad. "No, Jasmine, I reminded them who we are." The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered her verdict. The HOA officers who had assaulted Angela were found guilty of harassment, assault, and abuse of authority. Their faces fell as the gavel struck, sealing their downfall. The neighbors who once gossiped and whispered about Angela now sat in the gallery, their expressions filled with shame. Angela reached for Marcus's hand, squeezing it tightly. "It's finally over," she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. But Marcus, standing tall in his decorated suit, knew it was more than just the end of a trial. It was a statement to everyone who thought power came from badges or petty titles. Real power came from honor, sacrifice, and truth. As reporters swarmed him outside, cameras flashing, Marcus didn't boast. He simply said, "No one is above the law, not even those who think they make it. My wife deserves respect, every woman does. That's all I fought for then, and that's all I fight for now." His calm words struck harder than any uniform could. Angela leaned against him, proud. For years she was treated as less, just another face in the neighborhood. Today, she was the woman who stood beside a man who had once commanded battalions, a man who had defended his country, and now defended her honor. The HOA sign was later taken down, their so-called authority dissolved. The same neighbors who once mocked now greeted Marcus and Angela with respect, their heads bowed slightly whenever he passed by. As the couple walked home together, Angela smiled. The nightmare was finally behind them, and in that final silence, the truth echoed. When they thought they were just bullying another neighbor's wife, they had no idea they had disrespected the wife of a man who once commanded thousands.